Okay, there we go.
All right.
So welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here again. And how have your readings been going? Have you guys been remembering to practice a little bit of reading out loud, as it were? People are going so. Um, yeah, like I said, it's one thing that I want to re-emphasize again is that unlike no, I'm not going to say unlike classical Tibetan, because also classical Tibetan requires practice. You know, you have to really. Also, my case was really sitting down with a text that I just picked kind of at random, or that someone gave to me, and I just sat with it, and it would take me like 3 hours to translate a sentence, and then the next week it would become 2 hours, and then the week after that it would become so it would get slightly quicker and quicker, but it was learning through doing. And I think that's even more true of the spoken language, um, because then we also have, oh, hi, Sam. Because then in the spoken language, we also have the aspect of having to make these sounds with our mouth, and it is much more immediate, right? Using a spoken language is much more immediate, so we have to remember all this terminology. We can't kind of pause the person and, in theory, pause the person and go and look in our dictionary and come back and things like that. So it's a very kind of immediate process of having to memorize vocabulary, which for me as well, I mean, I'm going to recommend now, if any of you have used it before, that there's an app called Memrise. Yeah, Memrise. It's a very good app. It's got a very nice algorithm for helping you kind of repeat and keep things fresh in the memory. Um, and I used to just create my own courses on it. Yeah, if you log in via a web browser, then you can create your own courses on it, so that you can actually, if you have like a vocabulary list that you want to learn, and you just put in the Tibetan, and then you can put in the English, and you kind of use it to remember those things. Um, but then at the end of the day, the best way to remember is to use it. If you are able to, use a word that you have learned in an active conversation, that's like the best of the best way of remembering the word and learning to make it part of your vocabulary, as it were. So that's why also, even now to begin with, I'm really emphasizing the need to practice. Yeah, the need to sit down and read out loud and get used to making these sounds, get used to the process of speaking and enunciating and making it flow, right? Because I haven't heard all of you read, but those that I have, I've only heard a tiny bit. But from what I've heard, and it's the same with everyone in the beginning, that when you read, you end up reading quite slowly, and it takes a lot of time to think about each syllable, and you're trying to pronounce each one, and it takes a bit of time. But the point is to through practice, it does become quicker, right? And one is able to get the sentence flowing a little bit more, such that instead of reading one word at a time, or one sound at a time, suddenly it's much more flowing, and one can actually read the sentences. I'm not expecting you to get to the level of a geshe who's zooming through the lines before you even know he's finished a paragraph, but at least to try and get it flowing, because that's also what you need in conversation, right? In conversation also, you're going much more, you're not reading anymore, you're going much more just after the reproduction of the sounds into a coherent sentence. And just as when I'm speaking English right now, it has to flow as a sentence. If I start to speak like this, it becomes very jarring, right? It becomes like, what is it? It's a bit like the way Boris Johnson speaks in these Corona kind of meetings that he's have on TV nowadays. It's very strange, um, but it's not a very pleasant kind of way of talking. Um, and so you want to get that up a bit, so that even if you're reading the conversation, as we're going to practice later, you have the conversation written down. So you begin by trying it out, and then you try to make it sound a little bit more natural. And that's all through practice, right? So that's just what I wanted to emphasize, why it's necessary. Because again, I saw people who went for, they went through 2 years of a class, or, I mean, of course, the joke in Dharamsala, that the Tibetans make, the joke in Dharamsala that the Tibetans make is that, oh, this Inji, which is the word for any Western or any non kind of local, oh, this Inji has been here for 10 years and they don't know more than Tashi Delay in Tibetan. Yeah, they've been here for 10 years studying Tibetan at the library, but they don't know more than Tashi Delay in Tibetan. And likewise, even in the course, and this is a course for translators, and you could see that some people were really emphasizing their studies based on the books, right, on the text, and on really memorizing, sitting down and then just memorizing these words, but never actually saying them out loud, never speaking them. And then when they had to do something in class, like read out loud, they were actually still quite slow. And it's just because it's a separate skill, right? It's a separate skill that one needs to train. And if one doesn't train it, then it doesn't come about. So like that, that's just my kind of, what is it? Another advertisement for learning to read out loud. Yes, Sam, you had a question?
Hey, Shahar, how about listening? So, I mean, if like I'm learning any language, not Tibetan, but previously, if I were like to come up with and say stuff, and then somebody would reply back to me, and I'm lost. So that sort of discouraged me from talking,
Yeah,
because I can't understand anything when they reply back to me. So I think like it feels like listening
yeah.
might be the first way to go. I don't know.
They're just as important in a way, uh, but the speaking, I think, the speaking is more foundational. I would say, because if you're able to say something, if you're able to say, "Oh, the weather is nice today," or you're able to use a certain word in a certain context, then you're also much more likely to pick it up when someone else says it, right? Whereas if you've heard it before, even if you've heard it before and you hear someone say it, I would say you're less likely to pick it up. Whereas if you know it, you know how to use that vocabulary and use that sentence structure already, then in my experience at least, you're much more likely to catch it when other people are using it as well. So you're right, both are very, very important. And it's kind of part of the game. That's why it's good to see it as something that is a fun game, to try and speak to people nevertheless, right? Especially the Tibetans, they're super, super, super happy if you try to talk to them in Tibetan, right? Because apart from like the whole thing about the preservation of the language and the way that it's dying out, they just really enjoy, a non-Tibetan who's trying to speak Tibetan. It really tickles them. So, so you're always going to have a lovely little interaction. But yeah, it happens often. You say, "Hi, how's it going?" And they say something back at you, and you try to smile and nod, and sometimes that passes, and then you try to ask something else, and then they give you another response, and maybe you get it, maybe you don't. You smile and nod, and you kind of try to get through it. And even quite later on, that happens when there are bits of the conversation that you might not understand, but you will get away with kind of like, "Oh, that's all, yeah, yeah, yeah." You'll get away with that. And it's fine, because they know that, you're not proficient in the language. They're not expecting you to understand everything immediately, so they're okay with it. It doesn't look strange to them, right? Whereas most of the time they're super impressed. If I would go in the Kora in Dharamsala and I just say Tashtile to a Momola, right, to like a little grandma walking there, and already she'd be like, "Oh, your Tibetan is so good, it's amazing." And all I said was Tashtile, right? So they're very enthusiastic about it. They really like it when it happens. So it creates a lot of nice opportunities for that. So yeah, I would always encourage just go for it. If you ever get a chance, it's very important to have that interactive part. Um, and until then, we just make do with what we have. We just try our best. But it is very important to hear these sounds being made as well. And then you kind of try to imitate that. So that's why I found for the alphabet, I learned with Bill's kind of fluent Tibetan, and it has like these recordings for all the letters, and I just sat down and I wrote lines and lines of ka, 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 and I would be saying it out loud and writing it and saying it and hearing it. And so for me, that stuck really well. That kind of the fact that I was speaking it and hearing it and writing it at the same time, it made it really stick. And then you just kind of try to do the same with vocabulary. You hear something, oh, what's that word? Yeah, so you learn how to say that back to them. Then you try to write it down. They will dictate to you the spelling. You're going to get it wrong like 5 times before you manage to figure out which car it is. And then you try to use it again. And this process that you learn how to learn. At least that was kind of my experience. That was kind of my system of just trying to create that. Yes, Pablo.
Yeah, Shahar, what do you think of Bill's book when the dialogues begin? What is your opinion of the method he uses compared to other new ones? There's like a few new ones that have come out now in the.
Yeah, I mean, I never really used it past that. At the time, I was gearing myself up towards a classical Tibetan class, and I was coming from zero, so I just wanted to learn the alphabet basically. And so for me, the first 3 modules, or however many it is, which are dealing with the alphabet and the different combinations of letters, I had a copy of that. I think from Bill, I had a copy of that, and then it it it, it proved a very efficient method for me anyway. I do remember then moving on to the first conversation bit, and now looking back at it, I looked back at it afterwards, and it was like, oh, tashi dele, deboyimbe, and it's like, oh, that's very nice and sweet and simple. But at the time, I was like completely lost. I was like, what on earth? They just jumped a level, and I have no idea what's going on. So yeah, it's I think it's a difficult thing to learn without some kind of instruction. To learn just straight off a book is more difficult, and it seems like it's a big jump. But looking back at it, then it isn't really a big jump. It's just that someone needs to kind of help. It doesn't just. I think just using a book on its own can be quite tricky.
Yeah, that book I know. Some geshes, American geshes that used that book to when they were gonna go and move to India.
Mm.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
All right.
Shahar,
Yes.
on the Moodle, you advised a book or a teaching method?
Yeah, so that one that I posted, I don't know if you guys all saw in the Moodle. So that was it's a very new book published by the Tibetan Library in Dharamsala by Francisca Oto. And that's kind of what we used in the Lotsawa school was kind of, it wasn't exactly the same, but it was what later became this book. And there are other volumes that are going to be coming out. And so the way that we learned in school was based on that. And I thought that especially the bits that were based on the bits in the book were very, very good. I found them very, very well crafted. I think the book itself, of course, nothing is going to be perfect, but it's a very nice way of bringing in things one step at a time and giving you a lot of different ways of looking at things. Like it has all these conversations, and then there's recordings, and then it explains the grammar, and each topic kind of builds on the previous one by adding vocabulary. And so this week we're talking about the weather, and this week we're talking about this. And so I thought it was very, very good. But again, whether one can use that book on its own without someone to teach you, then I don't know. It's a very good question, right? But again, now I don't know, they're probably still running, but you could probably get like a Sukhya classes, and they would be happy probably to run those with you. Yeah, I think Lotsawa might start offering things like that as well because of the pandemic. So who knows? These kind of online Tibetans basically. Because they used to do it. They used to do it if people were sick or if people had to go back home, then they would just have their class over Skype, and it seemed to work. Their conversation classes. Yeah. So then, let's see, share the screen. Okay, so we're back here, right? And so just kind of very quick reminder of what we did, just to, so we're back on the same page, as we looked at making the sounds, right? Some people are a bit you know, if it was a bit confused or a bit was overwhelmed maybe by everything that came. But again, it's not really about knowing all these words and learning vocabulary at the moment. I was just really emphasizing the sound, the vocal aspect of the Tibetan language, just to show that there are these different combinations and how it is important to, you know, pick out these different sounds, right? I have a very kind of, oh, whatever, it's fine kind of attitude a lot of the time. And I remember having that a lot in the beginning. And especially when I was learning by myself, I was like, oh, who's going to tell the difference between a go with a mao and without a mao? Who's going to tell the difference? You know, so I'm just not going to bother with that. But over time, it proved catastrophic, right? Because you get into a bad habit, and then it's difficult to get out of that. So I think it's very important to get it very ingrained in us as a habit that, you know, these sounds are all kind of unique, even if to us they sound very, very similar. It's sometimes it can even be very monosyllabic in a way. It sounds like, you know, they could have made so many different sound combinations, but they chose, you know, the fact that a pa yata becomes a cha again, and it's like, why constrict so much instead of just making new sounds somehow? But that's the language, and actually the point is that there are subtle differences that one needs to be paying attention to, right? So then we went over all these different types of sounds, the way that some are very close, some are identical. And then you're mainly relying on the context or sometimes the usage of the word, especially with this lovely example of the yu, and the tokpa and tokpa, which again, it's just one of those things. These resultatives, again, remembering that, you know, because they are used in the colloquial, and they seem to make a difference for the Tibetans, that they will use, you know, this gom will sound to them like an active doing verb, right? I am meditating. Whereas this gom, you know, since it's lower and it's softer, they will hear it and they will be like, no, that one's not the meditating, the agentive nominative verb. It's this kind of very, it's an involuntary verb, and it's something that, you know, you're already familiarized with, right? And then it becomes, as we saw, part of this, you know, gom tree, where you add two words that mean the same thing, and it kind of clarifies things most of the time. But you can also use gompa, yeah, gompa to just mean a habit, and then, you know, you can talk about the good habit and the bad habit, and then, but there will be a different set of verbs that you can then apply to that, right? Because whereas some, you know, some of these some kind of noun or, you know, verbal constructions will then take some kind of a very active verb, the gompa, because it's an involuntary, will only take very kind of, they can take both, right? So you have a construction which makes it like, I fell into a bad habit. And it's funny how sometimes the similarities with English actually surprise me, because also for the Tibetans, you know, you would say gompa shor, yeah? Oh, I don't think I've turned on the thingy. So you will also say gompa shor, and shorwa is literally the verb to fall, right? So they say something mirroring the English, which is gompa shor. I kind of fell into a habit, yeah? And there's obviously, there's different ways of doing it, because then there's teb, also shor gompa teb, and then the active one would be gompa so. But some Tibetans were not too happy about that, right? Like, so that's one of those things that, so is to like to make, right? And you know, you make food, you clean the house, you make the house clean. It's the same kind of make that you would use in those contexts. And so you make a habit, yeah? You make a good habit or you make a bad habit, and it kind of implies that you're doing it intentionally. But some Tibetans weren't too happy with that for some reason, like that. So just remembering, again, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself in a way, but main thing here is, again, just the sounds, that the differences can be quite important in some cases, right? So then right, so here we kind of rushed a bit, so I might want to review a little bit more about this, in that these sounds that do run into each other, right? And so again, this is something that from the classical, or from a book, or from reading it in these textbooks, like the colloquial textbooks, unless they say something, if they have a little note talking about it, then there's no way of knowing that you read this amdo, right? Obviously, I'm sure every textbook will use this as an example to discuss this, like, oh, this is a strange thing in the language, da 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 da. But there's nothing from the yigi, from the letters themselves, that is telling you that that's how it should be read, that's how it should be pronounced, right? And similarly with lobsang, yeah. So some people won't say it, some people will, but you hear the sound of the b, yeah, the lobsang. And in English, some people write it like that, right?
Shahar, quick question. Is there a name for that when it is the way it is, you know?
That it does run into each other, or that it doesn't?
Right, like there's no grammatical rule for that, right?
No, I wouldn't say a rule. There's not really a grammatical rule, because I think it is very much a colloquial, like a thing of a spoken language, something that how the language changes over time, and mainly to do with these open sounds, right? So you have a, or you have lo, or you have gya, or dro, and when they're paired with certain other sounds, it sounds a bit awkward to say them. So if you were trying to be very neat with amdo, it would kind of be like ado, which is a bit awkward, right? Especially if you're talking quickly, and also with dro de, right? I have to like, I'm almost having to do that with my throat to try and get it to be a separate sound. So I think it's just like something that happens over time with the language, that they just it's more comfortable to say, right? So it's more comfortable to say amdo than it is to say do, yeah, or lobsang than it is to say lo sang. That one's not too bad.
Yeah.
And gyatso is not too bad. But then this, for me, this one is horrible if I try to like say it clearly. It's like draw de ye. But if I try to say it quickly, then it would be like draw de ye, which doesn't really, it doesn't really sound like a Tibetan would say. So it kind of picks up the leftover of this, which somehow becomes a na sound. Yeah, so it's a drun de ye.
So when it comes to, there's no like rules based, right? Like in classical.
No, I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say so.
And no pervasions. Is that what you're saying? Like, it's not pervasively the way that if there's an ow as the second syllable, that it's necessarily the n.
Right,
it's
right.
like not pervasive.
No,
is that what you?
Exactly.
Okay.
I think
Pervasions are good, hey Pablo, because then we kind of like, we learn the rules and we go, aha, we know it. Pervasions we like.
No easy answers with Tibetan quite often. It's even the Tibetans, you know, the teachers in our school, you know, because they were from different parts of Tibet, and even they would joke around that they don't know how they're able to talk to each other, like, because they have such different linguistic habits that they even for them it's kind of funny sometimes, what seems right and wrong kind of instinctively, right? So yes, I don't think there's a rule of why necessarily it would be a na. It's nothing necessarily to do with the owl. It's just what comes out comfortably, and it, you know, then you hear other people say it, yeah. So just to keep aware of those. And there's not that many of them, but you'll hear them sometimes. So then if you hear it, and you'll be like, oh, okay. Because then also remember with this one as well, where we're not talking about an open sound at all, but nevertheless, the sound changes quite drastically, you know, to become like a nga sound, right? And maybe this is a Dharamsala thing. I'm not sure. I have my doubts about it, but you know, you will very rarely hear shegime unless they're using this she, yeah, unless they're using this she, which is to talk, to say something, right? In the classical is to explain, but in the colloquial is just to say, or you know, to talk. So I think probably to differentiate those two, then this one will still be a shegiyu or shegime, yeah, and it'll be very clear. Whereas this one becomes a shengime, yeah, sheng, yeah. So you get this nga sound coming out of nowhere, and there's no way of knowing that that should have been there, and there's no reason for it, because as we saw, technically there shouldn't really be much of if any difference between these two sounds. This one might be a little bit stronger, right, because of the vowel, but it would just be very similar otherwise, right?
What does shengime, what does that translate to? Shengime.
Shengime,
What is, yeah, what is it, man? Like, what is it in English?
that I don't know, right? So
It means I don't know.
yeah, so shepa is, you know, knowledge, like sherab is this wisdom.
Yeah, see. I mean, yes, yeah. Yeah.
So
And
it is used slightly differently from the we saw before, this koa, yeah. So koa, which is you could get very philosophical about this. So koa, of course, is coming to the listening part. So if we have the three wisdoms of listening, contemplating, and meditating, then this talking more about the listening part, because you can also say it for I didn't hear, goma song. Yeah, I didn't hear, but also hakoma song. Oh, we have it over here on the side. Means I didn't understand. And I had very many discussions with the Tibetans about, okay, if I tell you Goma song, how do you know I just said that I didn't understand instead of that I didn't hear you properly? And they would just be like, why would that be confusing? And I'm like, why wouldn't it be confusing? Because, you know, sometimes the problem is that I didn't hear you properly, or sometimes the problem is that I didn't kind of understand you properly. And for them, they're like, well, either way, I'm going to have to repeat myself, so it doesn't really matter, you know. But yeah, so it's this go which kind of straddles those two meanings, and then you have the she, which seems to be a bit more. It's a deeper kind of level of knowledge, if you like. So you would use the goma song for something kind of immediate, like, oh, I didn't get what you just said, that kind of a thing. Whereas if it's like, oh, I don't know how to, you know, build a house, right? Then that's something like a skill that I'm lacking. It's kind of very pervasive. It's a very general statement about my knowledge. And then they'll, oh, kampas. So this is a nice one. So, opa. Kampa, so that's a house, yeah. So like we saw before with the so, which is to make, right? Kampa so shengi me. Right? So then it's saying house making, right? To making a house, I don't know, right? And you would never say kampa so hakomason. That would be strange, because this one is very immediate. Also because of the auxiliary, which is no, maybe best not to make that connection, because there might not be pervasion there, but. It's much more immediate, and it's much more kind of a superficial level in a way, like that. Whereas the shengi me goes a bit deeper. It's like, I don't know something in general, right?
And can you just substitute the me for re, like shengi re? Shengi re? Can you say that? Like, I do understand.
For another person, yes. So if he knows something that then you would use shengi re. Yeah. We got a lot of noise now.
Sorry, the audio is a bit dodgy. Maybe, yeah, that's better. Could you please repeat that if you didn't mind?
So for oneself, it would actually be yu, yeah? If you oneself.
Shengi yu.
One of these exceptions. So don't write it down as a paradigm, because it's actually one of those weird ones where she is an involuntary verb, right? Because knowing something is something that is a result of learning something, right? And so it's kind of, you don't actively know. Yeah, it's not that there's an agent and that agent does the knowing. Knowing is seen as something that you acquire. Yeah, you acquire knowledge, and so you know it or you don't know it. And in a Tibetan colloquial, that would mean that you use you wouldn't use the self class of the Doug class of what's it called? The word's gone right out. The way that you would so you wouldn't use the Shengi Ye, but usually you would want to use the Shengi Re, right, which is for a second person or a third person. It would sound like that's the way to do it, right? So grammatically that would be kind of correct, and you can even use. Sorry for those whose this is going a bit fast. You can also use the Shengi Du, yeah. Which again is a very immediate, yes, I know that, but most people wouldn't use it. At least as I've heard it, for some reason people tend to use this first person construction, even though it's an involuntary verb.
It'd be wonderful to learn some of those phrases.
Shahar,
we will go into all this because this is all going to come when we look at the
it's just an overview.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
So again,
is that the same? Is that the same reason why Hakoma song is not Hako Pa Min?
Kind of, but again, with the Hakoma song, it's very intentionally the song, right? Because the song is like, so when you use, we're going to look at it later on in the class, hopefully a little bit, but when you use the classes of these verbs that are to do with the Doug, with the self, which are yin and min and ye and me, then it implies a volition on the part of oneself, right? So, and if it's non-volitional, then you would end up using these constructions for shen, for other. And so one of them is the song. So actually saying hako song or hako ma song is to very clearly indicate that it's involuntary, right? That whether you understood something or you didn't understand something, it's not really up to you. You either got it or you didn't, right? So it's actually, it's marking that it's involuntary, right? Because you listen and you think about something, and then you might, as a result of that thinking and listening, you might understand it or you might not understand it.
Do you know if did this split come in through Buddhism and Sanskrit, or was this sort of native to the Tibetan language? It sounds like such an interesting psychological sort of.
You mean the division into the?
Yeah, the way that they're thinking about voluntary and involuntary and thoughts, and it just seems very Buddhist.
I think it definitely, yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it definitely did come in through the Sanskrit as well, because I mean, so much of the grammar, especially of the written language, came in through the Sanskrit, such that it would be interesting to learn actually if there's some kind of. Oh, can someone mute themselves? I'm hearing. Let's try again. No, still. Let's try again.
Jess, I think it might be you.
Let's try now. Sorry, I muted you, Jess, just to try. Yeah, sorry, Jess. So yeah, it would be interesting to know what the Tibetan spoken language was like before the coming of the written language, right? Because there were two very separate things that happened. I don't know if there's someone who's done something like that. So then, but yeah, I mean, it is fascinating, and I think it probably does have to do with the Sanskrit grammar as well. I'm not gonna put a pervasion statement on that, but it is fascinating, and for the grammar geeks, it's gonna get even more fascinating as we get more into it, because it's really cool, and then you get to really thinking about all these different verbs that we just take for granted in English, because we don't have to think about things like that. Because then there's also another level that's going to come in to do with direct perception and inferential cognition, right? So the song, in other contexts, the song and the du will be used for things that you know directly. If you have a direct perception of them, you know them directly, you can use the du. But if you don't know them directly, then you can't use that. You use the other type of verb to indicate that you don't know them firsthand, but you know them inferentially, or that you know them indirectly. So yeah, the whole thing is fascinating. And the Tibetans, like, they will pick you up on that. Like if I say that, oh, my friend went to India, and I used the song which is a past tense that can be added to a verb to make it into the past tense, but this direct, right? Then they will say, oh, did you see them go? Did you see them go to India and arrive in India? And I'm like, oh, actually, no, okay. So then I would have to correct myself, yeah? So yeah, so this is all fascinating. Don't worry, we're gonna get into all of that because that's where the grammar gets really really, there's a lot to it, yeah? Like that, okay. So yeah, so again, but don't worry too much if some of you are feeling a bit lost. This is just because these topics are coming up and it's good imprints, yeah? You hear it and then trust me, hearing it the second time will actually make it clearer then. Like that. So then we also discussed this line just briefly again about the fact that most of the genjuks, yeah, most of the postscript letters end up not being pronounced, right, in the colloquial language. So to remember that. This is not shog, yeah. I had a friend who wanted to be very kind of proper and he wanted to try and pronounce all of them, but then eventually some of the Tibetans were a bit like, why are you doing that? Yeah, they find it a bit odd as well if you try to talk like that. So it's not that it's a shog, it's a sho. It's made short by the genju, but it's not really pronounced. And so similar, you would get the point here where all of these would sound the same, apart from the lub in certain contexts, right? The lub should be pronounced, and it's very nice if you pronounce it actually, but especially the youngsters, as I said, they tend to not pronounce it. And so you have a la, and la, which will all kind of sound the same. And then you can say something like tashi la la, lavain, yeah? Tashi la la, lavain. Or even worse, tashi la la, lain ba. Then it's completely, what is it? Street talk. So you would say, yeah, tashi is the person, la is marking the person to whom I'm saying this to. So no, so first you would have the honorific, right? So tashi la, so we're being very honorific towards tashi. And then we're marking them with the ladon to say to who we are speaking. And then you would say lab, to say that you said something to him and you said it to tashi, right? So tashi la 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 vain, yeah? And you just because, so here the lab does come out in this case, and then, but the youngsters would make it like this with emphasis, right? The youngsters would say it like that, and then they would just say tashi la la in ba. Yeah, so you would get 3 la 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 in a row. As it's tashi la 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 in ba. Yeah, so it's tashi la la and then la in ba, and it's just the way that they talk. This kind of this slang, but again, this is slang, so don't, until you're proficient in it. It's one of those things that our teachers would always scold us for saying, but then you'd meet them on the street and they would use it all the time. So it's one of those things like that. Okay. Then just again, so yeah, we saw about the regional accents and dialects, yeah, where certain sounds change altogether. So that's something you just have to experience firsthand. You know, I've had experiences where, you know, I went to Tosamling Nunnery in India, where they had a new geshe at the time, and they asked me to translate for him for a session, and I'd never met him before, so I wasn't used at all to the way that he speaks, and he happens to be from Kham, but it seemed to be a different part of Kham because I was a bit thrown by his accent, and he would just, so I was used to things like je, you know, like pronouncing gears, je, and things like that. I was used to that. But then one that threw me off was the gom, actually. And he would pronounce it as if it had no naro. Yeah, he would pronounce it gum. Yeah, and gum means a box, right? So he was like, oh, blah, blah, gum, gummy, gum, gum, and it's like, what is he doing with that box? What am I going to do with the box? And it took quite a while before I realized, oh, he means meditate. That makes a lot more sense, right? So yeah, you're going to get all these regional differences in pronunciation. So you have to kind of keep an eye out on them. And then that's when in doubt, you ask them to spell it. And so that's when the spelling comes out very handy, yeah, like that. Okay, there we go. So that was a not so quick recap of what we did last week. So then let's move forward. So again, getting you to read out loud. This is very, very important, I think, and I think I've harped on this enough. One thing to try is reading backwards as well. And I don't mean backwards like, you know, each letter backwards, but just each sound in the sentence go like, you can go from right to left, or you can go from the bottom, you know, up, or you can go any kind of direction, but just reading the lines backwards. And what this does, do this after a while, yeah? So if you read forward and you get used to reading it, yeah? And then once you get a little bit of speed and you can see that you're becoming proficient, then what actually tends to happen is that we start remembering certain phrases in the text, right? So if it's like sangye, right? If it's a text that has the word sangye a lot, or even like sangye chomdende, right? And it, like you're reading a sutra and it has the word for the Buddha Bhagawan, sangye chomdende, and you see it again and again and again. And so your mind will stop actually reading it. It will just be like, oh yeah, there's like a pattern recognition thing that happens. And so you're just going to say it automatically and jump ahead in a way with your eyes. So it kind of becomes easier, but you're doing less actual reading in a way. So one teacher was very nice, and he said to me, okay, he saw that I was doing this a lot, and says, okay, so start reading backwards now. So start from the bottom of the page and just read it one sound at a time, going backwards. And it really does work, because it's you're not expecting it. There's no expectation of a phrasing. It's like kind of reading backwards in English as well. It's very difficult if you're not used to it. So it freshens things up, and it's very good exercise to do.
Shahar, how do you recommend we start working with tones?
With tones, again, if you have some of the recordings either from some on the website or the various resources that are out there, then yes, I would recommend, like I said, doing this kind of exercise of hearing it, writing it, and saying it, right? And you just do your best, right? Because unless you're able to get a Tibetan in front of you and have them, you know, with a stick kind of be like there to correct you when you get it wrong, it's very difficult for me to really think of another way of doing it. But as long as you really try to be conscientious about it, you hear the sound and you try to imitate it as best as you can, and you say it, and then you link it with the written letter by writing it down, then over time you get kind of used to that. And then you just try the different sounds out, you know, together. And then that's why I like the fluent Tibetan one, because they would mix them up, right? They would mix them up, and then you have to kind of it asks you to write them down blind. Yeah, you have the tape saying ka, which one, and then you have to write down which one you think it is. And it's ka, and it will just give you a limited set of options, but you try to recognize them. And then you say them out yourself also adds that spoken dimension. But whether you're getting it 100% right or whatever, that would take a local kind of listening to you and correcting you to know 100%. But I think as long as you try to imitate, then you won't go too far wrong, right? You won't get it too far wrong as long as you're really trying to imitate. Try to kind of forget your own accent, which can be very difficult. But like I said, there's like a different tongue that you use for different languages, and people who are bilingual will kind of know this. So try to kind of see how that Tibetan tongue works, right? And how it kind of makes those sounds. So yeah, but it's a tough one, yeah, without having someone there in person to check you and doing it, but you do your best, right? And over time, it's something that gets trained a lot. So over time, trying to do it again and again, you will get it, hopefully. You know? Does that help at all? I don't know.
Yeah, that helps. I just was wondering from your experience how to approach it, and that sounds very reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way I did it. And then, I mean, like I said, I learned with the fluent Tibetan with the recordings, and I just tried my best. And then also at the beginning, I was imitating the Wiley, but this Wiley, not the version in the Wilson.
Yeah.
And between those two things, it kind of was approximate enough that then kind of when I was meeting with actual Tibetans, they were okay with it. They would still sit down and be like, no, you have a problem with this particular sound, right?
Yeah.
You have a problem with this particular sound. Say it again. No, listen to me, and then they can train you specifically like that.
And so, like, how do you make the transition from sort of being able to approximate individual sounds and then starting to hear and use words, just building up really slowly?
Yes, exactly. Because again, also the faster you talk, the more blurred it gets. And I think, in my opinion, and it's a controversial one, that you can get away with a lot of mistakes when you're talking quite quickly, right? Like, I think Tibetans who are trying to check your speech and are trying to kind of, like, if it's a teacher who's paying attention to your speech, then they might pick out that you're not pronouncing them exactly right. But on average, people will probably get what you mean, and so they won't correct you necessarily in an average street conversation kind of thing. So you can definitely get a language level that is sufficient to have some kind of a conversation, that people can understand you, and you can have a conversation. That's not a problem. But then it is worthwhile investing then at some point in having an actual Tibetan listen to you and correct you and actually get you very good on those finer points. Because then if you want to use, especially these ones, be able to use these things in a sentence and you use the correct one, then you need to know those differences, and you need to be able to pronounce them well enough, those differences, so that the Tibetans can pick it up. But yeah, and also you can think about it from the other side, that also, for the sake of talking to people, I mean, I had this experience. I lived in Italy for about 3.5 years, and so the Italians, they all want to learn, at least at the center, that they all wanted to learn English, so they would come to me and they'd be like talking their best English, but the accent is quite heavy. But just because they kind of have a heavy accent and they don't pronounce all the words the way that it's supposed to be pronounced, doesn't mean that I can't understand them, right? So there's something to be said about, people who are native speakers. They can understand you despite these mistakes, or not necessarily mistakes, but despite a heavy accent most of the time. With Tibetan, it gets a little bit more tricky because of how dependent it is on the sounds, right? But overall, I think, especially with the colloquial, having all these other mechanisms to help you out, right? Like the pairing of words that mean the same thing together, or the different conjugations and so forth, they're going to get you over the hump of the main thing, such that I wouldn't worry about it too much, but I am still saying it's very important, right? But I don't want to discourage you either. I don't want to be like, oh, unless you nail these down perfect, you'll never be able to talk. I don't want to send out that message either, right? So the middle way, of course. Yeah. All right. So yeah, so that's just one trick for the going forwards and backwards. Yes, you would build up with the individual sounds, yeah, and you just try your best. You try your best to pronounce them as quick and as properly as you can, and then as quickly as you can. And you just see that through practice, it does get quicker. You are able to just go through the lines a little bit quicker as you practice them, right? Like that. Yeah, so that's why I'm saying please do your homework of practicing, because it really does make a difference, right? Okay, so another thing I want to talk about before we move on is this thing about pausing, right? Or taking a breath, and knowing how to, because also in English, I mean, I don't have any proper sentences here either, also in English, but also in English, you need to know, we have a lot more help usually of when to pause and when to take a breath, because we have commas, we have full stops, we have a lot of different types of punctuation to kind of guide us in that. Whereas the Tibetans, I wouldn't even really call the shays and all these things, I wouldn't even really call them punctuation, because they're used very inconsistently, right? Just because you have a shay doesn't necessarily mean that it's a new sentence or a new part of anything. It's tough to tell sometimes what the shay is doing. It's often helpful to have, it would also often be very helpful to have more shays than there usually are, but I wouldn't really call them punctuation either. So it becomes a case, especially with some texts that have very long, kind of paragraph long sentences, you know, to know how to try and read them without, you know, blacking out, basically. You know, which if any of you are familiar with David Foster Wallace, you might have an experience of, but then even there, at least you have some punctuation, so it helps. Anyway, so if we divide it basically into talking about verses, you know, verse and prose, then the verses are much easier to get this down, because the verses will have a rhythm to them, right? Whenever you have a composition in verse, then the lines will always have a very regular number of syllables in them, like the meter. So, you know, it goes from 5 to 7 to 9 to 11. It's always an odd number of syllables, and then it creates a certain rhythm, right? Which actually helps you with the reading of the text, and it helps you with the memorization of the text as well. So I just put here the Lojong Tsigema, which is the 8 verses for thought transformation. And again, I'm not dealing with the meaning of the word. You don't need to know the meaning of any of these words to be able to read them, right? To be able to say out the sound that they're making. But the point that I'm trying to show is that this particular one is, what is it? Dag, ni, sem, chen, tam, che, la. So it's a 7, right? So whenever there's a 7, they're always kind of in pairs, right? So there's always, like, you would always kind of, they're always kind of into like 3 pairs, and then like something, the final syllable, right? And it kind of creates this rhythm, right? And so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this kind of rhythm really helps you read it. And actually, it then goes with the meaning, because sometimes if the words are kind of cut by this rhythm, it really doesn't work at all as verse. So it can actually be very helpful also for understanding the verses sometimes, to understand that there is rhythm going on. So in this case, you would have dag ni, yeah? Dag ni samchen tamche lai, yishin norbu lelag pe, doncho drupe sampa, yi taktu jepa zempa sho. Yeah, so it's very nice, it's very rhythmic, it has a nice flow to it, right? So, and that kind of helps you, because it makes it flowing almost automatically if you can get into that kind of rhythm, right? But if I was to, and the point I'm trying to make about the rhythm is that if I was to add like if I was to, or let's say I was going to remove something, if I was going to remove this ni, right? Then even if there was something else coming later, even if I add just a random sound at the end, right? It would still sound awkward, right? So if I try to now read this, dag sem chen tam che la ni, and I don't know if that sounds weird to you, but to my ear, it's completely off, right? Why? Because semchen is a single word, right? Which means sentient beings, right? Semchen, the mind possesses. And also tamche is a single, it means all, right? So then the rhythm here is cutting them in half, right? Because it's like dagsem, chentam, chela, ni, and it completely ruins everything, right? Whereas, let's see if I haven't ruined everything. No. Whereas here you have, that's kind of the reason for this ni, right? You could argue that this ni, right, which you've probably seen in Wilson, you've probably seen with Craig, it has some grammatical purposes, it's a syntactical particle, but actually it's in poetry, in verse, it often acts as a throwaway particle that they add to shore up the meter, right, the rhythm. And so here they add this ni just to make dag ni, yeah? So then dag ni semchen, each of the two, you know, the pairings falls nicely within the rhythm.
Shahar,
Yes.
I'm just speaking on behalf of somebody who's put in the chat. I'm not sure if they've got audio working or not. So on their behalf, they're requesting, please, is it possible you could make the print larger so it could be more easily read?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I was just trying to fit it all in the single page, but here we go. So yeah, so we're still with here. So it's just a mention about the rhythm, right? So dagni semchen tamche la yishin norbu le lag pe karele hag pe don't you drupe sampa yi taktu jepa zimpa sho. Right? So it's very nice, it's very melodic. And so if you can get into that rhythm, it actually helps you read it, right? And so even, but then listen to me try to do it backwards and it probably won't, well, it's probably going to ruin everything, right? Because it's like shok par zin par jetu ta yi pa sam pe drup chok dun pe lag led bu nur shin yi. See, my mouth really wanted to say yi shin. It didn't really want to say shin yi, right? Because of this expectation thing. La che tam chen sem ni da, yeah? So it's a nice exercise to do it backwards. And the point is that you memorize it, you read it, and then it's also useful for memorization, right? Because then like makes it that you can go faster and faster and faster, right? Like that. So that's how you, in terms of when to pause and how to add a bit of structure or rhythm to the reading, then verses will always have this structure to them in terms of the different lines, right? So then if we take another example from the Gyasa Lagalen Suduma, so that's the 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas, and here we have 9, I think, instead of 7, but the rule is still the same. You have 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 and 1, right? So again, it goes Teljor, Druchen, Nyeka, Tobdu, Dir, Dagshen, Korwe, Tsole, Drulche, Chir, Nindang, Tsendu, Yepani, Nyensem, Gompa, Gyese, Lale, Yin, right? So it still has this flow to it that you can try and get into, and it helps you read it. So of course, in the beginning, it might be a bit more clunky, right? It might be a bit slower getting into it, but try to ride that wave, as it were, right? And actually, with a lot of the verses, then this also actually helps in the reading of the verses later on, if you're wanting to read them, because you know that the author's at least trying to preserve the rhythm by having these pairs. So you can already kind of say, oh, that's going to be something, right? This is going to be something. This is going to be something. This is going to be something. And then we've got something left over, right? And then it's like, oh, okay, so I already know kind of, even just for the dictionary, right? You can already know which bits to look up in the dictionary, right? There's Teljor, obviously, like the leisure and endowments, right? The Druchen is the great boat, right? Then the Nyeka is the difficult to find. And then Tobdu is like when we have attained those, and Dir is just like this here, now kind of statement. So you've already got all the elements kind of chopped up for you by the rhythm. And if it wasn't chopped up like that, then it would sound awkward. It would really sound awkward in terms of this rhythm.
Just wondering if that first word there, Teljor, is also Tenjor. They pronounce it both ways with the ow taking on and the N?
No, because here you've got the la. It's not an open sound, yeah? So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it would be like a telwa and a jorwa. And teljor is like a joining of the two things. Yeah?
Thank you.
Yeah. Lasso. And then you have, what is it? No, prose, right? So with the prose, then you tend to want to use the grammar. So this is when the Wilson comes in handy, because you want to keep an eye out for verbs, for ladeuns, and for especially the agentive particles in any way that they come, right? Because it can also be like the way or the pe. Yeah, so by this I mean, when they have yin pe way, yeah, when the sa is added to the pa or to the ta or to different open vowel sounds at the end, right? So because they're usually good places to stop. Here, first of all, I've got a debate from the Lorig, so that's even easier. You've got very structured way of writing, right? There's a very it's super structured here. So then, and what more, you do usually get it chopped up very nicely with the shays, yeah, with these lines they're called the shays. So the shays really cut them up very, very nicely usually. So you know that it's kachignare, pause, right? And then you get these kind of situations. Okay, so this is going to be something that, tseni is a definition. So you know it's going to be a definition for something. So you could still use what I said above to say, okay, rikpa is a verb, right? To know is another word word for knowing. So you rikpa ale loi tseni. Yeah. So because there's a verb here, again, you need to kind of pick it out, but you rikpa, which means object knower of objects, or object knower, and then loi tseni is the definition of mind. Yeah. And again, here you might be like, so here you do have an agentive, but it comes right at the beginning. So you probably are okay to run through that. So you say le rikpar chawa. Oops. Chawa is a verb, so we can pause there. And then you have the rest of it, which is yulgitseni. Yeah. So, and then I've got the thing here. Yeah. Yulgitseni du jok sarna. So here you have the verb telling you to stop. And then here you have another verb, but then it's got a verb after it again. So I would kind of say it like that. Yeah. Le rikpar chawa yulgitseni du jok sarna. Yeah. So the verb here is stopping me, and the verb here is stopping me. And this is just to like, if you say, so that's kind of a very familiar particle. It will become a very kind of familiar particle in the debate text that marks like what the opponent, what this kachig is saying. So it seems like a good place to chop the sentence. It's a lorik parachawa yulkitseni du chop. Yeah. Again, it's something you kind of get used to after a while. But again, this is a case where they're helping you out. Here you just have, okay, so this is another thing to be aware of. Then with the debate format, right? So the debate format, you will have these three very lovely particles, or these three very lovely things here, which are going to be marking your subject, yeah, your churchen, which is your subject, your predicate, which is your yimpartel, yurpartel, mepartel, whatever, and then you have your reason with a yimpechir, yeah. So then again, you have a very nice sentence of, again, this is something that you just learn from the debate yard, that you will hear it like, tsema churchen. Pause, right? And they like to make it long. So you can hear it. Then yul rikpa yimparte. Yeah. So again, because of the verb, it kind of makes me pause there. Yeah. Yul rikpa yimparte. Yeah. And then lo yimpe chir. Right. So like that. So the yins end up getting truncated with the ends of things. And here we just have a single word, so we just add it along. But here you might have a little pause, right? And again, madrubna, usually they're very quick. So you actually see that they're going to be they're very quick. They're sound bitey, right? So madrubna tsema church and lo yimpartel ripa yimpe chir. Yeah. Cała duna, zema chuchen, you shepa yimparte, you rikpa yimpeche. So here you kind of, just because you're picking up that there's all these yimpeche, yimpartel, yimpeche, which are repeating themselves, then you just take that whatever comes beforehand is a little phrase, and you can pause a little bit afterward. Yeah, because of the verb, because of just being a little phrase, because of being the content of the syllogism, right? Like that. So that's just a little bit about the debate format that I'm sure you're going to be doing lots with Craig. So you're going to be seeing these things again and again and again. And then, but of course, this is like I think one of the first debates in the Ludwig. But actually, the debates and what comes here can get very, very long, and also what comes here can get actually all three places can get very, very long, and so you kind of. Yeah, with the debate, it's a little bit different because they're sometimes intentionally confusing, right? They try to confuse you by saying them very, very quickly, and so someone's telling you how to try to pronounce, how to try and read it out loud or say it out loud. They will just tell you, no, you just zoom through the whole thing because you don't want your opponent to catch anything, right? You don't want them to catch what your subject was because then they might make a mistake, right? They have to be on it. But yeah.
All right, I have a question about ra. It's a little bit hard sound for me to make, and then I know the West Coast final R versus an East Coast and British final R is very different. Yeah. And I've noticed our Rinpoche, like sometimes his final R's is very hard. Like he'll say like do, but like internal R's, like, are they more like a British R that isn't really there, or are they still hard?
It kind of depends, like you said, on where it comes in the phrase. And sometimes it really is just about emphasis, that they will draw it out kind of just to make an emphatic thing, like we might in English, if I say English, and I'm kind of just, there's no reason for that sh at the end to be extra long, but I might use it to kind of make some emphasis of some kind. But in general, with the yimpe chir, then it's kind of very final. So they would try to like yimpe chir. But here with impartel, again, it kind of comes out very harsh, yeah? But it's kind of a stock phrase, one of those things. Impartel. So you would impartel. But then some might not pronounce like that. I mean, some might be a bit, yimpata. I've heard people say yimpatal, because then they wouldn't even say tel, they say tal, yeah, yimpatal. So it can depend on the individual person for the pronunciation, but I think both kind of sounds exist, yeah. Yeah. Chora, yeah. Yeah.
Chorba, yinbartel. I'd say like yinbartel. Very hard. Yinbartel.
Yeah, just something to listen out for, and that's kind of like anthropological study. You have to listen out to the speakers and see how they use it, and yeah, and then you're going to get 100 different cases because people are going to do it differently. Yeah. Ale, let's move on. So then this is from the presentations of mind and mental factors. It's like in the introduction. So again, here you have like a de young, which is one of these stock phrases, like moreover, so like also that, and then also. So it's kind of like moreover, and it's like jikten D. So this already kind of creates a longer sound here. So you have this 6-case connecting particle, which already is kind of making it a bit longer. So, but actually you are probably not going to stop until you hit, this stronger pause of the, or are you? Let's see. Deyang jikten di mashi tsuncheki sego nyepa tsamgi chopar mi zinpar. Wow. No, I did it like, yeah. So you might have you might have a little pause there, right? Oops, hang on. You might have a little pause there, and you might have a tiny pause there, but really the only pause you get is at the end. So you have to take a deep breath. Because again, these are all kind of describing, this is a very strong kind of a part of a sentence, right? And you see this a lot. I think I don't know if you've covered it with Craig already, or in some of the classical classes, that you get this a lot with many different types of verbs being negated in this kind of midzinpar, or mayimpar is a very common one. Blah, 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 mayimpar. And then this is a very kind of strong pause place, because it's everything that came before is kind of saying, without so-and-so, without everything that came before, and now we're transitioning to what, in contrast with that is going to be coming next, right? So that's a very strong kind of construction. Other than that, this tsunche means kind of included within. So it's talking about what's included within what happens in this world before you die. So again, this tsunche is a particular type of grammatical particle, so you might take a little bit of a breath there, despite this kind of connection there. And again, with here also, because it's part of a phrase, right? It's niepatsam gi chokpar, yeah. So it's part of a phrase, so you wouldn't want to cut it so much, right? So, okay, this is getting too finicky actually.
Shahar, I didn't understand why you wouldn't take the gi across to the sunche. Because if you're looking for ladons and verbs and stuff,
Yeah.
I thought that would have been a good, what is it, a sixth case? I would have thought that would have gone there. So I'm trying to establish patterns with what you're saying.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm going to learn. So yeah, why would you not chuck that sixth case across?
No, you would. In this case, you would, I think.
Okay.
It's just that the tsunche is the reason, the main reason for it, because the tsunche is, again, it's a time marker, right? It's kind of like a time, kind of an inclusive, exclusive marker, which is being connected. So yeah, since it is being connected, then you probably would include it in one. But you would say de yang jikten di mashi tsunche ki. And then, because the minute I say the key in this case, I'm tempted to continue already. So that's why I said it's a maybe very small break. Tsuntaki sego. And then because this is one phrase, right? Niepatsangim chokpar. Was there a negation there? Mi chokpar? Anyway. No, so not being satisfied by merely gaining, right, the food and the clothing of what is included in this life, right? So because this is kind of a very strong phrase, you wouldn't want to chop it, even though because this would be I'm going to go with one of those things that you talked in the class with Craig, like last week, I think, that it's a non-case usage of the agentive case, right? This niepatsamgi, even though it might be, now that I think about it, but it's one of those strange uses of it that, no, I take all that back. It's a very good case usage of the agentive case. It's the thing by which you are satisfied, with which you are satisfied, like that. Anyway, maybe this is this will be too time consuming, and it's one of those things that, again, once you start reading and once you start kind of also getting with the meaning of the words, and it will become a bit clearer. But just as a general signpost, then keep an eye out for the especially ladons, which are very strong, and the agentive particles and verbs that are usually going to be the ones marking things for you. But that doesn't mean that you won't find these sentences where you will find yourself having to read 3 lines like this in a single breath, unless you take an artificial pause, right? But then that's fine, right? I've not seen a good reason why you would pause here and not pause here. in some of these cases, and you just pause when you run out of breath, and then that's it, right? But again, so this is just to say about the pausing. Here again, just another quick example before let's really move on. The Umagompa Rapsel, so this is the illumination of the thought by Jetsun Kappa. So this is just to show you, again, a case where they have the verse and then a commentary on the verse. So again, you have, with the verse, you have a very lovely meter. Yeah, so it's Drowa, Yowe, Chu, Nangi, Dawa, Tar. Yeah, how many is that? Drowa, Yowe, Chu, Nangi, Dawa, Tar. This is an 11 one, right? But it still goes exactly the same rhythm. So you have this 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, like that. And then what this particular commentary, which is actually, most of it ends up being Tsongkhapa quoting Chandrakirti from his Bhashya. So what he's doing is kind of adding in bits to the verse to make it clearer. So here you say Droa Lungi Yowe. So again, the Chedra is not always a good place to stop, because it's a good place to stop, it seems, when it's an agentive, when it's marking an agent, but not so much when it's marking a tool, right? Because here, this is something is being moved, something is being moved by the wind, yeah? So it's water that is being moved by the wind. So that would flow into each other. So Droa, Lungi Yoi, Chui, Nangi, Dawa, Tar. So that whole thing becomes just one bit that you have to say in one go, because they're being connected by, usually the sixth case will actually more often fuse things together, right? And especially in this case where you're talking about it, it is like, yeah, the tar is like, it is like the moon, which is inside of the water that is being moved by the wind. And so since they're all being connected with all these like bits of the puzzles, then it forms one phrase. You just stop at the tar. And then you have this yoa te, so it's like yoa te, because this is like a colon, yeah? Yoa te, kichigi jikpar. I can't actually see because of the thing. Kichigi jikpar. So, and then de la, so the la is a very pausing. De la, ninja gyurpa, gang yimpa de la, de la, ninja gyurpa, gang yimpa de la do do. Yeah. So you sometimes have to read it more than once, all right? And you will see the Tibetans doing it as well, that they will read, you'll give them a piece of text and you're like, oh, Geshe-la, what does this mean? And then you'll be like, oh, this is a Geshe, right? They have like 20, 25 years of study under their belt. They're like a walking encyclopedia. They're just going to, know it like that. And actually they look at it and then they read it and they stop and then they read it again. And you're like, what are they doing? Surely they know everything on this planet. But also for them, there's like a process with the language, and it's something, a part of it is also to do with the fact that they say it out loud, and the hearing of it plays a part into the understanding of it and the way that the sounds either connect or don't connect to each other, like that. So this is something that comes, just through practice again. But you've got these markers which kind of try to help you, like the las and these third cases, and but it's very difficult. It's one of the last things that you kind of get really good to grips with, because it's not obvious at all. But even if you just read through it, as long as you don't forget to breathe, you're fine. But it's better to try to do that as well as one can. And it's like in English, you read in English, and you have to learn when to take a pause in the sentence. Okay, any questions on that before I move on to the spelling? Any kind of...
Just one question. I'm assuming you're showing us those classical texts because there is this, it transfers this to the colloquial. So when we do the conversation 1 and 2 and all that sort of stuff, it's the same rules we apply, whether it be classical and taking a breath or the colloquial, conversations that we will read. It's the same rules. Is Is that kind of what you're
And
thinking?
yes, and in the colloquial, it'll be even easier, right?
Okay.
Because the colloquial is actually built around making it clearer for someone to hear, right? So quite often it's like I was kind of, that's what I was just thinking in my head. I was like, oh my God, why did I pick these things? Because that's like the hardest ones that I could go with. But actually in the colloquial, it becomes easier because it's designed for that. It's designed to kind of help the person know the different parts of your statement by, also yourself is knowing which bits that you are pausing for and emphasizing and so on and so forth. So yes, it does become easier with the colloquial. Yeah. But just since I set you the task of reading out loud and just with texts, then it's a good thing to just keep in mind and try. Okay, so that's the, and then we'll get back to these in a second for the spelling. They're good just to have a wealth of words to try and spell with. So, right, so the spelling, or the jolo, is a wonderful little sport, right? Which is, okay, just to see it in one go. So it's a wonderful little sport where you try to understand what the hell is going on as the letter is being spewed at you at a very great speed, right? No, but often the point of spelling is to be able, quite often in the spoken language, to be able to clear away these miscommunications or things which are unclear. If you're not really clear which word the teacher is using, or you're asking a question and it seems like whoever asked the question to, they got it confused with another word. So you say, oh, not that one, but this one, and then you can spell it for them. So it actually becomes very useful. So because again, it is difficult to pick out what sound is being made, especially if the sound is being made on its own, right? If I just say to you, oh, I'm going to talk about tokpa, and as we saw before, not only are there many sounds that are very similar to tokpa, yeah, but you have no frame of reference for what I'm talking about, really. So then it might be confusing about, just to be able to pluck out of the air which one I'm using. So then in those instances, and in many others, it becomes very useful to spell. And this is, it's a great little practice. So, so the way it goes, right, is that you are now kind of building the syllable letter by letter. And so it's good if as someone is saying it, I don't know, I'm kind of visual about it. So I kind of I kind of try to build the letter and put the things there in a visual image in my mind. Sometimes it doesn't work at all. Sometimes it works, but it's just something that you have to find a way what works best for you. So if it is just so I'm going to write up here. If it is just like a single, letter, then you just say, oh, this is a ga. Yeah, this is just a ga, and it's normal. But then once you start spelling letters, then I need something with a cell. So there we go, cell. So if someone is asking you, oh, is it that selwa, or is it that selwa, which is just a different tense, but is it, which one are you going to writing down? So then you have to have a way of conveying this to the other person. So the way that you do that is this is the root letter, right? So the root letter is what comes here in the middle, and it might have a ngunjuk, it might have certain young juks, and then it will have some kind of a vowel. So here we're starting quite simple by saying, okay, so it has a ngunjuk of ga. So how do you say that in this language is to say it's a gao. Yeah? So this o sounds marks that it's a ngunjuk for the other person. Right? And you always say that you go from left to right kind of thing. So you always start with a ngunjuk, and actually there's only 5 that it could be, right? So there's only 5 different ngunjuks that it could be. So you just say, oh, gao, and then you launch off into the rest. So dao, bao, mao, ao. yeah? And this ao, this gao, whatever marks for the other person, so this is the ngunjuk. And then you would start building the main letter, which, as you can see, something like jor can be quite a complex thing to build, right? But here we just have one letter, so it's easy, right? So we say gao sa, yeah? Gao sa. And then we also have a genjuk, yeah? So there's 10 possible genjuks that we could have, right? And there's also, technically, there's 2 possible yangjuks, but you never end up using, you know, since the da, right? There's also a da, oops. There's also a da yangjuk, but since the da is never, it's always kind of omitted, it's never really used, then the only one, the sa yangjuk. And so to say this, you would just say gao sa la, and then you just say it out to them, the full thing, the result. Gao sa la sel, right? Gao sa la sel, right? So you're going, oh, the gao is the thing, then the main thing is the sa, and then we have a la and a genjuk, so it's gao sa la sel. So if you want to spell it out, you would go gao sa la, and then in kind of in brackets equals sel, yeah? Just to completely butcher it in English phonetics, but you would go gao sa la sel, yeah? But then you might also have all sorts of things happening around. So you might have one of the vowels, right? Or you might have these constructions where you know, you have head letters and foot letters, as it were. So that gets a bit more complicated. So we can try this one, right? So solwa is to request, right? And so again, here you just need to add the vowel in, the narrow, right? So here's when you need to, this is the occasion, again, one of my things in the beginning, I told you I would always try to take shortcuts. And I was like, why do I need to know the names of the vowels? You just write the little squiggle and it's fine, right? Why do you need to know the names of the vowels? But here you go, this is why you need to know the names of the vowels, because here you're gonna have to tell the person that it's a narrow, right? One helpful thing is that each of them will contain the vowel that it is, right? So the gigu has the gi sound, which is the gi is the one that it's pointing to. The drengbu is the je, yeah, the e, so it contains it. The naro is the o, so it contains it, and the shabju is the u, so it contains it. So that's one way to remember if you're forgetting which one is which, that it's always, these two is like the first sound, and then these two is the last sound. So to say this one, then you would very similarly say gao and sa. And now you have to add that it's also, you have the sa and you have the naro on it. Sa, naro. And then because if you have 2 steps, like more than 2 steps, then you have to pronounce it for them, right? So in this case, you wouldn't jump straight ahead to saying the la, but you would first say to them the so bit, right? So you would say gao sa naro so la sol, right? And this is because over the building of something more complicated like this one, it might get a bit confusing. So you're saying, okay, this is the ngunjuk, this is the main letter, being a narrow, so it sounds like this. Now I'm going to add a foot, which is going to make it sound like this. Then I'm going to add a genjuk, so the final product is this. So it's kind of like you're breaking each stage and telling us like until you get to the final product, right? So this one would, if we go again, this will be gao, sa, naro, so, la, sol. Yeah, so kind of equals sol. So you kind of have an extra step in a way that this one is just telling them what happens when you when you've added the naro to the sa. And then you have the la, so then you have a sol. right? And it keeps building. So then we can, what can we do? Draw, don. Let's go with drill, right? So this is still from draw to liberate. I think it's a past tense, so it's one of the 10. Even if it isn't, doesn't really matter. So again, with the, you first say the ngunjuk, yeah, so it's ao, and then you have a ga, right? The main letter is the ga. So you have ao, ga, and then the vowel always comes at the end of building the rest of the letter, right? So first you would deal with this rata, yeah. So these are called the tatas, yeah, the various different types of hanging and head letters and hanging letters. So there's only 3 types of head, the la, the sa, and then you have 4 types of hanging, of, you know, their feet, yeah. The ta is literally to hang something, like something that you hang. So they're hanging at the bottom there. And the way that you would add them is to say whatever it is, ta. Yeah, so it's like you're telling, so you have a ga, and then you're hanging at a ra, right? But it's confusing because the ra actually comes first. So it sounds like ao, ga, rata, ja, naru, drul, la, drul. Yeah, so it's ao, and then you have the ga, and then you're telling them I'm going to hang a ra on it. So it's ga, rata, and then you say it out for them. What happens when you add the rata? It becomes a ja. And then you add the naru, so it's naru, dro, la, drul. So every build person, so it's go ow, and then you say ga, and then you say rata, yeah, rata, yeah. And then what happens when you do a ga rata, and it becomes a ja, yeah. I'm going to write it in Wiley just so you can see how, you know, you add it, and it becomes a ja, yeah, ga rata ja, and then you add the naru, and it becomes do, yeah. And then you add the la, so it becomes drul, yeah, the final product. It's gonna jump if I put it in there, but yeah. So you build it very slowly from top to bottom, and then adding the naru at the end, or like the vowel at the end. And again, you go with the ngunjuk, you go with the root letter, and then you start decorating it, right? So you're decorating it with these various ratas, or it can be a yata, rata, lata, yeah. The wa, you don't say wata, you say wazur. You just call it the wazur, which is just the name of the little hanging wa, like that. And similarly, if it is a head letter, it just means that you start with the head letter as opposed to the root letter, right? So this actually saves a bit of work because it doesn't have to be a separate process rather than just making a lot of ta, yeah? So if we go with this jor, yeah, if we go with the jor, then there's no prefix, so you just skip that part. And you just go sa, and then you add the bata, yeah? Sa, bata, and then it becomes ba, yeah, but a stronger one, yeah? Sa, bata, ba, yata, because you're hanging the ya, right? Yata, then it becomes a kind of a ja, yeah? Naru, jo, ra, jor, yeah? So the point is that you're building it from top to bottom, always using this rata, lata, sata, yata, and rata combination to just kind of go from top to bottom. And in each time you kind of add something, you you say the whole thing again. You say the whole, what do you get when you add that, right? So this is, again, is a very nice exercise for the pronunciation, because then you're kind of creating differences in pronunciation as you're going along. So of course, if you're doing it very quickly, it doesn't really get heard out too much. But if you actually want to do it as an exercise, then it's actually very, at every point, it's kind of adding something and it's making it either stronger or weaker, or it's losing the aspiration suddenly. And you kind of have to keep track of those things as they're happening. Right? So it's sa, bata. Then when it becomes fast, it becomes sa, bata, ba, yata, ja, naro, jo, ra, jor. Yeah. And again, if you just hear someone saying that to you, it's incredibly confusing. But after a while, if you practice doing it yourself, then also hearing it, which the Tibetans, if you're sitting there and they're like spelling something at you, they're going a mile a minute. But you after a while, you get the hang of it, like that. So it's just again a matter of practice. We can try some other ones. So here we have mig, yeah? Mig. Oops, let's make this bigger. Yeah. Mig. So the mig, yeah, it doesn't have any head letters or anything like that. So you would just say dao, yeah, for the head letter. Dao, ma. Then you say gigu, yeah, for the gigu, and then you get mi. And then always the suffixes, you always say them together if there's two. So you just say ga, sa, oops, ga, sa, mi. Yeah. The dao, magi, gumi, ga, sa, mi. That's how you kind of get dao, magi, gumi, ga, sa, mi. And then after a while, you kind of get the hang of this. Yeah. Nisa, bata, ba, yata, ja, ra, jar. And then if the kids, they make a song out of it as well, and which is very nice. So it's kind of like, I don't know if that was like Daoma Gigumi Gasa Mix. Like they make a little song and it's nice and playful as well. If it has to be a little bit shorter, I think it's like Ao ga da 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 narudro wadro. And they just kind of sing along to it, and that's kind of like their little game, to get them doing it, to get them playing this little game and singing along, and it's a great. You can try that out. And singing is a great way, or singing or chanting is a great way to kind of get away with mispronouncing the sounds all over the place, because obviously you've got a melody. So it kind of covers up some of the mistakes. But just to get used to the process, then it can be quite helpful, like that. So yeah, so this is kind of the process of how it's how you spell, and it's again you can see it as an exercise of learning how to listen to each part of the sound and then minute differences. What happens when the different words, ao ka. So already when you say the ao ka, it's already stronger because you're pronouncing that. And then also with the naru ko, you already have to remember that it's not just a ko, it's already ao ko. It already has that strength to it. Or what's another good example here? So garata genre, no. So sa, here we have like a sa kata ka, yeah? Sa kata. So the ka that you're saying with the kata, yeah, is a normal ka, yeah? But then we say kata ka, which is stronger, right? So it's a very short amount of time, but the difference should already be there, because what you're saying is look, I have a sa, and then I'm adding a kata. So this ka is just a regular first column ka. But then the result, right? The resulting sound is also ka, kata ka, but this ka and this ka are already not the same, right? Because this is a ka that has a head letter on it, right? Whereas this ka is just a regular ka, this ka is already a sakata ka, right? So then it's a very good practice to just like with the reading, you just go through it and you're like da. So I'm starting here. Da jembu de yang yang ao jagi guji ga jik ra ta 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 jembu de na den ao da gigu e no ao I'm not very good at this. Ao da gigu di a sha a gigu e di and ma sha gigu shi sa shabju tsu na tsun cha da che ka gi yata kya gigu ki sa sa. So you just gotta go along like that, and again, that's something that helps the reading. It helps the pronunciation, it helps the reading, it helps it become quicker. And it's very good for learning your spelling as well, which is something that, believe me, you forget after a while, like that. So yeah, so this is something that you can practice. It's kind of like a side project that you could try start getting your hooks into. And it goes again with this package of just trying to read out loud. So verse and prose and trying to read it forwards and backwards, trying to get better and making the sounds. And together with this, the spelling. So I can maybe do a little more examples like that. So you can kind of get the procedure of it together with this diet, and then practice. And then we can talk about it again next week if you have any questions about it. We can just do some practice to get the hang of it. Any questions about that? I don't know if for some of you this might be completely new, and then this might be a bit like overwhelming, but please, if there are any questions or comments.
I just have a question about conformity. So if there is some variation in the way we've learned to spell read, you know, like, is that okay? Are we all trying to be like 100% uniform? Or is there a place that if you've learned something, you can do that? Where are you at?
No, I mean, it's obviously the way that works best for you, right?
Okay.
And if a Tibetan teacher that has taught you a different method, then of course you can use that method. It's no problem.
There's a lot of similarities, Shaha. It's just that, you know, there's some little differences here or there. So is it okay if I maintain that, or, you know, that's not going to offend or upset or anything?
No, absolutely not.
I hope not.
And like we said, it's really just one of the amazing things about this language is that there are many different ways of understanding the language and how it should be spoken, and even the grammar, the way in which it can be understood. So I think it's good to have as many inputs as you can, and not kind of, oh, it has to be like that, and then you just do it like that. And no, it's a way that works best for you and the way that makes sense to you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Here I'm just kind of, regurgitating the way that I learned it. And hopefully it can be useful in some way, because I find the spelling bit, it's a very nice exercise. It's something, it's kind of challenging. I still find it difficult. And it's especially challenging if someone is doing it at you, right? So often in conversation classes, like I said, you'd ask them for a particular word. It's like, oh, what's that word? And they'd be like, oh, it's jor. And I'm like, jor. Okay, and I want to write it down. I was like, okay, there's like 10 different ways that I could write that sound, right? Because it can be with just a simple ja, it can be with a payata ja, it can be so many different things. So I'm like, okay, how do you spell that? And then they're like, oh, it's sabata payata jona jor. I'm like, what? Like, and then even if they slow down, it can be very difficult, right? Because they expect you to hear the differences between the ba and the ba. I'm kind of basing it off the joke of this thing. They'll expect it to sapata pa. And it's like, so it's the pa dangpo, pa sumpa, and they're like, they look at me like, what are you talking about? Of course it's the sumpa, right? Of course it's the third column. What are you talking about? By the way, this idea of the of talking like that, of talking like a ka dangpo, ka nipa, ka sumpa, that's not a Tibetan thing. It's kind of a Western invention in the way that we have started talking about these things. But from my point of view, the Tibetans I've spoken to kind of like it, right? They actually say, oh, we never really say it like that, but actually that's kind of, so it's a very simple way of pointing out which one it is. But it's not a Tibetan invention is what I want to say, because for them, it seems like just saying the ka is already, it's so obvious that it's a car 1 and not a car 3. So for them, it wouldn't even occur to number them like that. Yeah.
So why is it Dang Po but Sum Pa instead of Dang Pa? Or
where are you? Sorry.
Well, you said Dang Po or Sum Pa, but why is it Po versus Pa?
Oh, that's just to do with the number. The number 1 is like an oddity. So Dangpo is just the 1, and then Sumpa is the 3rd. So in the spoken language, that's just the way that they do it. The first of something is the Dangpo, yeah? Whereas the 3rd is the Sumpa. It's like the 1 is like an exception.
So all the other ones are Pa, Nipa, Shipa.
Yeah.
Only Dang Po is Po.
Yeah. Because if you're saying Sumpo, it's kind of it's more of a classical way of saying the 3, yeah?
Okay, okay.
But then it becomes like in colloquial, it's more often going to be Sumka, to say all 3, right? But you do use it sometimes. But no, it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, with number 1, even though number 1 is Chig, right? But you don't say Chigpa, because Chigpa means the same, right? Like you'd have Ni and Nipa, Sum and Sumpa, but 1 is Chig, yeah? But you don't say Chigpa, you say Dangpo, right? It's just one of those things, it's an exception kind of thing.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so, okay, while we still have time, let's try the conversations, right? So I hope all of you have a way either on your screen or something to look at the conversation, and there is, okay, I'm gonna use this breakout room. So what's gonna happen, it's gonna divide you into pairs, and then just practice doing the conversation. I'm gonna get us all back here in like 5 minutes, and then we can wrap up. But it's a very short conversation, very basic conversation, and just one person takes the mi dangpo, which is the first person, another person plays the part of the mi nipa, the second person, and you just try to have that conversation. And you do it once, and you can swap. So the first person becomes the second person becomes the first person. And for those of you who, it might be still difficult to read, just take it slowly. If you're with someone who's a bit better than you, then they can help you out, yeah? So people help each other out. And just, try it. It doesn't matter so much if you understand every little bit of it, but try to just have a nice little conversation, and then we will come back and kind of talk about it a little bit, right?
Conversation 1.
Yes, so conversation 1, yeah. Let's see. I'm going to break everything now. No, see, now it's only got the 3 of people like in the beginning. Oh, there we go. Wait. Here we go. Yes. Okay, so you might have to say opt into it. Oh, Pablo, you're... Seth, are you still here?
Do you hear me? Huh?
Did we get a message?
Everyone's
What is happening?
back.
Oh, we are all back.
Cannot hear you.
Okay.
Well done. I kind of popped into most of the class, all the classes. Some people were flying away. It was very good.
That was so cool.
Yeah, that was fun.
We're having a good time. So yeah, so we'll try to do more of those as we kind of try to learn more of the grammar, and then we can get more possibilities. And don't worry, straight away. So in the beginning of the next class, we'll go through the conversation and kind of clarify what it means, and some things are just in there so that you hear them, right? Some things are in there just so that you hear them, you kind of use them, and then the grammar of that will come later. So don't worry too much about it. But I just wanted to kind of give the impression of a small, tiny little conversation on the street, what it might sound like, right? So you have all these kind of extra ohs and oh yeah, and all these kind of sounds, which are kind of very typical of a regular conversation. More natural than what the textbooks might otherwise give. But then also you get the conversation. Once you try to converse with someone, you especially get that flowing aspect going. So that particularly helps, I think, as well. All right, well, let's end on that high note for this week.
Yeah, thank you.
That was excellent, Shahar.
Thank you.
Welcome. And so please do try to get a bit of reading done if you can, and try to practice the spelling as well if you can. And I'll try to kind of produce a handout for it so you can, it's just so that the process is clear and you can see how it's done clearly. And I'll post that on the Moodle, so keep checking the Moodle. All right.
Thank you very much, Shahar.
Nang, Kelayan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.